Yes. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon. I'm Andrea Miller. I'm going to be one of your hosts tonight. And with me is my marvelous partner in crime, Noel.
Hi, and I'm Noelle D'Amico, Director of Social Justice at the Workers' Circle, a Jewish social justice 125-year-old organization this year. And we just love working together with the Center for Common Ground. We've been partners now for a while. And one of the things we really believe in is collective action because
Yes.
any single one of us alone can't do it. And we're going to be talking about that more tonight.
Oh, most definitely. We are, because both of our organizations work on voting rights. We are going to be talking about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, H.R. 14, because we are talking about bills in Congress. We thought this time we would add, let's understand who the staffers are who work in the congressional offices, since these are the people you are probably going to be meeting with. And as each week, almost each day, outlines new horrors, insanities coming out of the White House, we will be taking some time today to be talking about sustaining the movement and next steps.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We know we have to resist in the short term, and there are many ways to do that, but we have to sustain for the long haul so that we can get to that goal of a truly multiracial democracy.
Yes, yes. It's almost one of those things where we almost made it to the mountaintop so we could look and see down in the valley. Now we have kind of tumbled down the mountain, and we are going to have to climb up again. But as we ascend, we understand the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities, and we will be working on building a much stronger foundation. So we really are, I feel like I'm back in the 1950s or something with voter suppression. It's changed, but it is ever so prevalent. So, from everything like closing polling locations, um, deciding, oh, you can only help so many people during an election. Are they keeping count? Or even telling people that, well, you're going to have to only get assistance from a direct relative, and then saying how people have to be related to you to even have them help you or return your ballot. I'm specifically thinking of North Carolina.
Yeah.
And those are just the odd ones, not even the incredibly obvious ones like photo ID, which we see in so many states. The other thing that we are seeing, we saw this in Arizona, the requirement for proof of citizenship, and now they're trying to make that national. Noel, do you want to add some?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to just go back to that closing of polling places, just to give you a sense of the magnitude. There were 100,000 fewer election day polling sites than in prior years. So this is not a small problem, and maybe one of those was in your community. Another thing that I'm really thinking about is the horrible voter purges that have gone
Yes.
on due to voter challenges where individuals come and they go before the Board of Elections and they might have a list of 10 or 10,000 names, and those names may have small irregularities with regard to spelling or address, or I don't think this person should be able to vote. And if you don't go to the Board of Elections, if you don't know you as a voter are being challenged and show up at the Board of Elections to defend yourself, you might be one of thousands that have been purged. And this has happened over and over again. They're even building voting purging into the SAVE Act, that terrible federal voter suppression bill that we talked about back in January, that we actually expect to start moving in the House at the end of the month.
Well, and then we also have gerrymandering where they, in states like Alabama, try to pack all the Black voters into one district. So there is one Black representative. And then we also, and this is very, very new. Well, maybe it's not that new, but the extent and its prevalence is new. Voter disinformation campaigns.
Yeah. Yeah,
All of those are voter suppression.
absolutely. A lot of you might remember that both during the primaries as well as the general election, there were phone messages. People were receiving phone calls telling them wrong times to vote, telling them not to vote, giving them wrong, absolutely false information about the candidates. So we've got to be really, when we think about the myriad ways that our freedom to vote is under attack right now, we realize that without voting as the cornerstone of our democracy, we lose our voice, our place in our own government. Democracy is about the government by the consent of the governed. And without a vote, there is no consent, no possible consent. And even with a vote these days, there's not too much consent going on. So tonight we're going to talk about why it's important to keep pressure on Congress. Some of you may be saying, oh, forget it. After that whole CR debacle last week, they're all a bunch of wimps. That's not what we want to go to. What we want to remember is that we, the people, have representatives in the Congress. It's co-equal power with the executive and the judiciary. There are special roles for members of Congress that only they can carry out. They are the people's representatives. And we, the people, have to hold them accountable. And I'm heartened because all across the country at town hall meetings, people are flooding to hold their members of Congress accountable. People have been, flooding phone lines, sending emails. I know on the SAVE Act, that the Worker Circle petition, which so many of you participated in, we have close to 350,000 emails that have gone into Congress. So some of you are getting, this is important. We don't want to let up on that pressure.
Our pressure helps them find their backbone. It's there, it's just temporarily lost. And so our pressure helps them find it. Now, a bill that is being reintroduced again, HR 14, it's in the House. It's already been introduced. It was introduced on March 5th, my birthday, by Terry Sewell, the Alabama 7, is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. One of the things that is different about this bill is, while it is putting back some of the main functions that were diluted in from the original Voting Rights Act of 1965, unlike that act, this is a bill, when passed, it is just there. We will not have to keep reauthorizing it. It's not like, oh, the bill is only good for 10 or 15 years, and then we have to do it again. So what does it do? Well, we originally, when they were going to challenge the Voting Rights Act, we were really, really worried that we were going to lose pre-clearance. Pre-clearance basically says if you are a state, a county, or a locality, and in the past, you have been guilty of suppressing the vote of voters of color or language minorities before you can make any changes to your voting rules, you have to get them pre-cleared by the Department of Justice. What they went after was the formula that determines when pre-clearance is going to be used. So that's what this act does. It redefines the formula. The argument was they created that formula in 1965. Things have changed. Not
Oh,
really.
that's right. There's no more racism anymore, right, Andrea? That just went
Oh,
away.
right.
We had a
Racism
black
just flew
president.
away. It
Oh my gosh.
evaporated. It's gone.
Insanity. Insanity. But
Yeah.
this is really important because that preventative mechanism just stopped thousands and thousands of state laws from getting passed.
Yes.
And that's what we have to remember. Sometimes we don't realize what didn't happen, but this Voting Rights Act, originally from 1965, passed because of the unrelenting pressure of civil rights activists and because of the courage, especially of those that crossed that bridge in Selma and refused to give up. This Voting Rights Act did its job well. So if we can adjust that formula, as the writers of this bill have done, this act can come back and continue then to prevent these horrible voter suppression laws that we've seen so many states pass, especially since the 2020 election.
So technically, this bill will establish a nationwide pre-clearance system so that it will prevent restrictive voting policies from even being enacted, and it expands the ability for voters to bring challenges saying, wait a minute, I have been discriminated against. And as I mentioned before, what is really different about this bill from its predecessor, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, is this is law and it does not require reauthorization.
You know,
Next.
Andrea, I was reading John Lewis's Walking with the Wind, which is both an autobiography of him and of the civil rights movement. And one of his dearest wishes is that the Voting Rights Act would no longer have a sunset date. It would be permanent law and not need to be reauthorized. And so that's a really important part of this bill.
Right. And that's how we got in trouble for the first time under Democratic Republican presidents in the Trump administration. The bill failed to be reauthorized. Well, we had some issues with it before. People were working on weakening it, but yes. So this would be our bedrock. If you are going to change and you have been found guilty of discrimination, and 34 states introduced different restrictive voting laws. Virginia introduced them, they didn't go anywhere. Virginia introduced progressive laws, that's what we passed. So I live in Virginia and I'm very excited about what Virginia's been able to do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But I love this slide. Kudos over to Josie for this slide, because if you look at it, the umbrella really shows that voters underneath that umbrella are being protected from these kinds of assaults on our freedom to vote. And of course, it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who said throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. That is a perfect example. That's what we're talking about here, is going from a situation of where there are states with a patchwork of laws where it's easier to vote in some states and harder to vote in others, where you need ID here and a different kind of ID there. This is a mess, and we need to clean it up so that we, the people, all the people, have our freedom to vote.
Right, right. And then vote by mail ballots, everything about that. Some states, anybody can vote by mail. Other states, you can only vote by mail if you happen to meet one of a set of circumstances. It's confusing when everybody is doing something different. Now, the bill in the House has 216 House co-sponsors. As I said, it was introduced on my birthday. It has been assigned to the House Judiciary. And now remember, the Democrats do not have control of either any of the branches of federal government. So they do not, or Congress, they do not control the House, they do not control the Senate, which means that it is very difficult to get hearings when you are in the minority. Normally, deals have to be made to get hearings. There will probably be hearings. I don't know that we're going to see any in 2025. We do not have the bill in the Senate. In the 118th Congress, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois was the lead sponsor.
Yeah. You know, right now, when there are so many assaults on our democracy and our right, I mean, tonight, President Trump is closing through executive order, which of course he can't do, the Department of Education. It can feel like, what in the world? Why are we talking about the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? If this thing doesn't have a prayer of passing right now, what in the world are we doing with this bill? But it's not just about fighting back. Fighting back is really important, very important, but so is fighting forward. What is the vision that we want to see? So we know we want to stop the SAVE Act, right? But how can we tell Congress what we want to see instead? This is what we want to see instead. And I just want to take us back. The Workers' Circle was just down in Selma for the 60th anniversary of the Selma Bridge crossing. We had more than 50 people there, so many young adults. It was a multi-generational experience. And we did a workshop with the Center for Common Ground while we were there. And we were inside the Dallas County Courthouse, which, for those of you who know your history, the steps of that Dallas County Courthouse were really the site of constant nonviolence, constant attempts by Black Americans to register and being denied, constant, that site to be in that space together. And what we were talking about in that time was how you set a vision and also how you work toward it. You know, imagine if all the civil rights activists said, well, you know, we just don't have a Congress that's going to be able to give us a voting rights bill. I think we'll just wait until the right people are elected to Congress. Did they do that? No, they didn't do that. They did nonviolent direct action in various localities, but they never gave up on the legislative advocacy at the same time. They did a both and. And that's the kind of stuff we have to be able to do, the both and, because at some point we want to change those no's into maybes and the maybes into yeses for the John Lewis bill.
My name is Jay Falk. We haven't met. I am one of the social justice organizers for the Workers Circle. I'm also the social justice organizer based in Washington, D.C. And so I have the privilege to represent the Workers Circle on the Hill. And you might be asking yourself after Noel's conversation, well, how do I turn those no's into maybes and maybes into yeses? What does that look like? What's actually happening behind the scenes? And why do people keep telling me to do these legislative visits? Why do people keep telling me to do these legislative calls? So I'm going to spend a moment now to actually talk about who you're talking to when you're calling and demystify that process a little bit. And also talk a little bit more about how to request a meeting and why it's so important. So like I said, there are real people behind the scenes in Congress. There are real full-time staffers who work for the legislators and write the bills that are coming through the Congress. And when we ask people to make a legislative visit, we're really asking folks to be a part of what I like to call the inside game, right? There's the inside game and the outside game. Outside game involves protests and mobilizations and pressure that are in the news and in the community. Inside game involves internal pressure within the offices of the decision makers so that we move them in the right direction, or they feel pressure to move in the right direction. And those have two different goals. One goal is obviously to change the vote of your representatives, but you might know that the representative that represents you isn't necessarily going to change their vote right now, at least not on voter suppression. So the other goal of these types of visits is to create pressure so that their behavior changes behind the scenes. Sometimes it's hard for us to see when we do that, and it works because it is behind the scenes. But I want to give you a really quick example. I think I mentioned on another call, which was that one of the conversations we had on the SAVE Act was that we wanted to make them feel that pressure. The people who are going to vote for the SAVE Act because they support the SAVE Act, they want to feel that pressure so that when there were suggestions behind the scenes that it might fit into reconciliation, that it might go on this fast track, those folks who are going to vote for it wouldn't put their neck out for it to fast track it. So these are the types of pressure points that we want to create. We want them to vote no, obviously, but we also want them to change how they're talking about it behind the scenes with their colleagues. And who has the most effect on how they're talking about it with their colleagues behind the scenes? Their staff. So legislators have dozens of different policies they need to follow, lots of areas. They can't be experts on everything. That's why they have staff. House offices are much smaller than senator offices, but they're almost all structured in a similar way. So I want you to take a look. This is the kind of overwhelming graphic, but I want you to take a look at the most far left part of the graphic at the bottom. When you call your representative's office, you are almost always going to talk to either a staff assistant, which is right here in the office staff, or a legislative correspondent or an intern. Those are the folks who are generally right out of college. The interns might be in college. They're going to man the phones. And they spend almost all of their time responding to, categorizing, and counting constituent feedback. That's your calls and your emails. So their whole job is determining how many of their constituents are reaching out to them on what issues and then relaying that information to their bosses. That's why when we say your calls matter and your emails matter, we know they matter because we know that they're being tracked by the staff who are going to report those numbers to their legislator. When we're asking you to go ahead and engage in a legislative visit, the person we really want you to meet with is actually not your legislative correspondent or your staff assistant. Those folks, while they are doing a very important work of like keeping track of your feedback, they're not generally policymakers. Above them are legislative assistants or legislative aides. Sometimes they're called policy advisors. Colloquially on the Hill, we call them LAs. And those are the folks who are going to be the major strategists, authors of legislation, and experts on their topic area. And they're sorted by topic area. So an LA might focus on only immigration and civil rights issues. In smaller House offices, they might have a wider variety of issues they focus on. And when you're calling the office and when you're asking for a visit, ultimately, you can actually be explicit and say, I want to talk to the LA on civil rights. And usually the LA on civil rights works on voting rights. You can also say, I want to talk to the LA on voting rights. That person is the person who's going to have regular meetings with their member of Congress and give them advice about what they think their boss should do on legislative issues. So when you talk to them, you're really talking to someone who has a direct ear of your legislator. I would say it's almost as good as talking to your legislator themselves. Above the legislative assistant, there's a legislative director. In some ways, it's actually not as good to talk to the legislative director just because they have so many different issues they track, and the LA might be more familiar with the voting rights issues on the bills we're talking about, but it's not bad. If it's a really hot topic, they might meet with their LA with you on that issue. And above them is the chief of staff. Chief of staff is someone who spends a ton of time with their member of Congress. They're with them hours and hours on day. They might not be an expert on their legislative issue, but if you can get their ear, then you can absolutely have a lot of impact on that member of Congress. If you can convince them that your concerns are really valid and important, they might be able to convince their boss, who's the member of Congress. And that's a huge amount of sway you might have on this one member's vote on this issue. And then obviously, some of you might actually be able to meet with your member of Congress themselves, whether that be through a town hall or by requesting a meeting directly. We find that the most effective constituents who are able to meet with their member of Congress themselves so often have connections to that member of Congress in a relational way. Maybe they're the rabbi for that member of Congress. Maybe their son goes to the same school because they live in the community, right? Also, maybe they're a big donor. That's also often the case. So these are people who have more access. But as a constituent, you probably have access to those people who might have access. So think about your relationships. Think about your connections. The member of Congress that we're talking about, especially if they're in the House of Representatives, they live in your community and they don't just stay in their silo. At least hopefully they don't. They probably have connections. So this is just a little bit of a structure of how a House and a Senate office works. This gives you an understanding of who's behind the scenes when we're telling you to call and reach out. And I really want to emphasize, whether or not you think your representative is going to vote the right way on this issue or on any issue, it's really important to reach out anyway. Because if they don't feel your pressure, there's no reason for them to change their behavior either on the back end or on the front end. And I want you to keep that with you.
Thank you so much, Jay. We're going to just let you know that we're going to go to questions and answers at the end. So if there's anything you want to come back to with the bill, with what Jay has shared, know that that's coming up. And we're so glad to have Janice Gay with us tonight. Janice is one of the coordinators of a democracy center for the Center for Common Ground. Janice is going to start us off talking about how do we sustain ourselves and the movement in this work. Take it away, Janice.
Thank you, Noelle. In times like these, democracy hubs are very critical in providing structure, support, and a sense of shared interest or purpose. These spaces are created to help with dialogue and interaction within the community. It helps to build trust and unity, ultimately strengthening, I would say, community connections through building awareness and advocacy. I would say building community awareness and advocacy through interactions and participations. That helps everyone be able to put their part together, be able to interact together, be able to talk with one another on shared interests. It's shaped by decisions, issues, and concerns. All of these things shape the democracy hub, ultimately affecting everyday life situations. People come together and they share their interests and their concerns.
Yeah. I think
Cool.
a lot of us at this time really are reaching to one another because we know we're not going to make it on our own. And some of us, though, are worried, right? I can't, right now, I had, some health issues and I couldn't go into the streets for a long time. And I thought, am I going to make a difference if I can't be there? Other people are thinking, what can I do? What else can I do? I'm over here in this state. I can't do enough from here. What is it? If we go to the next slide, what I want to tell you all is that there are a matrix of possibilities here for how you can respond. Some of us, frankly, covers over the head. We're freaked out. We're afraid. We're not sure what's coming next. Others of us are racing from one thing to the other, but we can take a breath and we can remember that actually actions of all types are needed everywhere. They're needed everywhere. Some of those actions might be the acknowledgement of human dignity, looking someone in the eye, holding a door, restoring those bonds of humanity at a time when we're being told to hate and be suspicious of one another. Some of those actions might be that you're going to take some virtual take actions with us. Some of those actions might be that you go to the streets. But we need all different kinds of actions because we're people who live in all different kinds of ways, right? I'm Noelle, but I'm not just Noelle in the streets. I've got a family, I've got a child, there are schools around me. You may have a house of worship that you participate in. You're an employee somewhere, probably, or a business owner. You're facing different struggles. What Janice is describing with the beautiful Democracy Hub model that the Center for Common Ground is raising up right now is how people can come together to strategize to meet their needs. Because, some of us are more secure than others of us right now. And we have to be able to be stronger together by gathering together. Let's go to the next slide. When you think about possible ways to take action, this matrix might be a little bit of help for you. This was developed by a guy named Daniel Hunter. Some of you may have seen this before. There are lots of ways to be involved and all are needed. And actually, there's even more ways than these. These are just buckets. You might be a person who feels really called and able to help protect people. Maybe it's undocumented people in your community. Maybe it's people who are suffering because they're not getting the medical treatment that they need because of cutoffs and funding. Maybe it's people who have been targeted because they're LGBTQI. Maybe it's people who are right now just not sure where they're going to get their next meal from because they've had to put more money into something else that had once been covered for them. Maybe you're a person that wants to contribute by protecting people. Maybe you're a person that is ready to go to the streets. You're aching for that. You want to express that publicly. You're willing to get arrested in certain circumstances to drive home that point. You're going to use your body to interrupt actions and to protest against actions that are going on. And that's a really viable thing and an important thing, especially right now. We want to hold that space for free assembly, free speech, and protest. We want to keep that as open as we possibly can. Some of us may find ourselves saying, what I want to do to contribute is to defend civic institutions. I want to make sure that people have their ability to vote and have an election system that welcomes them, not shuts them out. We want to have schools that teach actual history in its fullness and teachers who feel free to teach and not terrified about their curriculum. We want to defend those good works going on in the community to sustain our environment and to uphold. These can be local things as well as national things, but we want to defend civic institutions because they're cornerstones for our democracy. They're pillars, really, of our democracy. And then some of you out there may be saying, how can we build alternatives? Things are being taken away. Are there alternatives we can build? Maybe right now you're building networks of mutual aid. That's critical. Maybe you're building new forms of political parties, or maybe you're saying, enough, I'm not buying into this culture of hate. We're going to examine and develop a different way of being human together. You're building alternatives. All of those are important. Next slide. Sometimes we can say, will I do this? Will I won't do this? So there's a decision-making piece of this. And what I'd suggest to you is assess realistically where you are and think concretely. Because the reality right now is some of us are safer than others of us right now. And so we take that into account. That doesn't mean you can't do anything, but it means it's smart to take that into account as you're making your decision making. By the way, big surprise, some of us have more money than others of us. If you've got money, man, send it to those organizations that are working to demand that our democracy respond to us right now. Give it to those organizations that are helping people who have been unemployed or people who are under threat right now. Give it, give it, give it. Do your own readjustment of resources. But if you're a person with less resources, that doesn't mean you're any less a part of the movement. Of course not. In fact, one of the things, because I've worked in communities where people are economically impoverished and struggling on survival for many, many years. And what I've found is often the most generous people there, the people who will give you the coat off their back, are the people who themselves have experienced hardship. And so we know that it's not often the amount that matters as it is, I'm with you. You're not alone in this. I understand what you're going through. I'm ready to share what I have with you. Some of us have more food and job security than others of us. Well, let's figure out how we can take that position of security and help another person. Some of us really do. We have health limitations or physical limitations, but you are still part of this movement. There are things that you can do. What is the knowledge that you have? Maybe you're a retired teacher, right? And you have a lot of knowledge about how public education works. Or maybe you're a retired doctor and you're somebody who has a lot of knowledge about how the medical system works. Maybe you're somebody who used to practice law and you're not actively practicing, but you know how the system of the law works and you can bring that knowledge in. Maybe you're somebody who's lived in your community for a really long time and you know everybody in your community and everybody knows you, from the person that checks you out at the grocery store to the pastor at the church down the street to the school teacher in the school building. You know those people and they know you. That's a very valuable thing to bring to the movement. So remember, build community where you can and think about what it is that you have to offer to this movement. Next slide, please. So how do we sustain ourselves? Let's get out of that anxiety-driven stuff that we can all fall prone to, especially when they're sending attacks at us right and left and the media is reporting and things are flashing across our phones every 30 seconds. Hang on a second. Stop doom scrolling for 30 minutes and take that 30 minutes and do something else. You might take a walk with that 30 minutes just to center yourself and hear your own thoughts and remember your deepest values. You might take that 30 minutes and say, who do I know in the community that I might reach out to and see how they're doing at this time? Maybe you'll take that 30 minutes to make a call to your member of Congress and invite some of your friends to do the same. Maybe you'll take that 30 minutes and you'll write an email with us. Think about how you can take some of that time that gets wrapped up in all that anxiousness and put it to work for our democracy, for our human community right now. All of us don't have to race to the barricades. We all don't have to do the most dangerous thing possible. That's not what it's all about. What it's about is, what's the next step for you? What is that next thing? You don't always want to stay comfortable. You want to push a little bit out of your growth into that growth zone, right? What is that next thing? Maybe you've never done it before, but now's the time. I know that there are people on this call right now that have never made a visit to their member of Congress. And I know there are people on this call tonight that just made their first visit to a member of Congress. We want to be here for you as a national community of activists to equip one another, to encourage one another, to support one another. Remember, you are not alone. The movement is big. It is beautiful. You have so much to contribute, and we're going to need all of it along the way. And every time we gather together, our power to continue gathers as well. Because, someday I'm not going to be able to do something, and I know Andrew's going to pick me up and say, that's okay. I can go the next leg of that. because that's the way it is when you build community with one another. So we wanted to give you one more example of how you can build community and power. And one way to do that is to start a democracy circle. So I'd like to welcome Rachel Siegel, who's going to give you a quick idea about what democracy circles are. And I know we've got a bunch of democracy circle conveners on the call tonight. Rachel, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Noelle. So let me introduce myself real quick. My name is Rachel Siegel. I am our Florida social justice organizer. I'm based out of Orlando. And democracy circles are our way of using the power of your existing relationships to bring more people into this fight, deepen understanding, and link to strategic ongoing grassroots efforts to demand the multiracial democracy we need. So democracy circles are small group gatherings. Think 5 to 7, 10 people, maybe in a bigger one. They take action and learn together in community. And for democracy circles, we give you the plans, we help you, we support you along the way with actions and learning. And you're supporting national and local actions. So this past few months, our action has been to have a meeting with your representative about the SAVE Act. And we have some wonderful Democracy Circle conveners on this call who have done just that, and it's wonderful. Democracy circles are supportive and integrative of work that your organizations are already doing. You can go to the next slide, Josie. Thank you. So, like I said, together they learn, they do action, and they create community using their own communities that are already existing. Okay, next slide. So, myself, Jay, who you saw earlier today, and two of our other wonderful organizers, Francesca and Rio, are happy to meet with you to talk about democracy circles and to get you started. You can, once you sign up, one of us will reach out to you, set up a meeting, and talk about everything that's concerning you, how you want to go about this, and ways that you can build power and start a democracy circle.
I know we have some conveners on the phone. I think Susan
Yes.
from Boise is on, right, Susan? And you've made a visit recently. And Jay, you know some of the people. You saw some of them come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Cheryl is here. If you're a Democracy Circle convener and I haven't shouted you out, then please go ahead and put it in the chat. Tina is here. Who else? Let's see. I see Sally. Wonderful. I see Emily Pring. Thank you all for joining us. You are the soul of our movement. Wonderful. Yeah, Susan Hudson, people mentioned. Just trying to look through the participants to see how many other people I can find.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, we're so excited to have all of you here tonight, whether you're a Democracy Circle convener, whether you're a Center for Common Ground supporter, whether you're an activist with the Worker Circle, whether you sort of got this email and somebody said, why don't you go to this thing tonight? We're glad you're here. So let's open it up to questions, because I know there've been some things going in the chat. What are the questions that you have right now? Maybe it's for the John Lewis bill. Maybe it's about, Jay, what was that? Who was I supposed to meet with? And what did so-and-so do? Maybe it's something else. Let's open it up. You know, Jay, one question, let me put something forward. I know those were a lot of positions. Do all those positions have a parallel in the home office, or are you just talking about Washington here? Can you
That's a
say
really great
whether there's a
question.
difference?
That's an excellent question. So our local district offices have a totally different structure than our DC offices, and they work in combination and support of the DC legislative team and the other teams in DC. In local offices, there are two main roles. There are outreach roles and there are constituent services roles. Constituent services folks are the people who might help you if you have a passport issue. If you need help with a federal agency, they'll work on veterans issues if they're relevant to the VA. But these are things that might be solved directly by their correspondence with a federal agency. They're not policy issues. Outreach folks are in charge of representing their member out in the community when the member is not back in the hometown. So you'll see them often at community events, maybe a farmer's market, maybe a local committee meeting, maybe a civic association meeting. They try to be everywhere and anywhere so that the member is represented in the community and people feel like they have a ability to kind of reach out to the outreach member when they have questions or they want to talk to someone who represents their member of Congress. Those folks are also great to reach out to. They have a direct connection to the folks who are work on legislative issues in DC. We generally suggest if you're going to do a legislative advocacy meeting, because the actual policy advisors are the DC folks, it's good to meet with them. But it's always also important to do local outreach in person. It just gives a lot more power to your voice because they know that you took up time out of your day to visit them. And you can actually develop relationships with your outreach folks. And that also can create power, right? If they know you're a significant member of the community, they're going to listen to you and really pass along what you have to say, versus if they don't know who you are. So that's the power of building a relationship with your outreach folks. It's kind of a both and situation.
Thanks so much, Jay. That was really comprehensive. I really appreciate that. Here's a question. If you are calling and or emailing because you can't get a meeting, should you call or email daily? And if you do, should you stick to the same topic or switch it up? I mean, can we literally send the same email? Tina's asking.
This is a great question. And do you mind if I answer, Noelle, really quickly? Because I realized one thing I missed that I was planning to talk a little bit about, but I ran out of time, was like, how do you actually get a meeting? If you're asking for a meeting and it's not working, like, what are the pressure points that you can try to push to see if you can actually go ahead and get that meeting? So the first thing is that your office, I didn't spend too much time on this, has scheduling staff. Their full-time job is actually just making the senator or House members schedule. And one thing that they will almost always do is respond to constituents. They're not going to necessarily have you meet with the actual member of Congress themselves, but if you bother that scheduling person, I've actually never seen a constituent be unsuccessful at getting a meeting. Doesn't mean it won't happen. You might have a really, really bad member of Congress, but it is, I would say, a general rule, really, really effective. So if you need to help in finding that scheduler's email, you can reach out to me and I can help you find that scheduler's email. Another easy way to do it is literally just to Google your member of Congress's name, and then scheduler, and then you can find their name usually. And then if you find their name, it turns out that actually all members of Congress and staff for members of Congress have the same email format. And you can kind of backwards find it from that. Again, that sounds more complicated than it really is, but if you want help doing that, if you're like, I need help with that, please reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat and I can help you with that. It's easier than it sounds.
You know, I loved this question from Susan Hudson. I get discouraged by the fast pace of assault on government. I worry resistance pace can't keep up. Are there ways to accelerate the learning curve of resistance now? And then, at least, I realize we can't be on a sprint all the time. This meeting tonight is a great example of a learning curve accelerant. So a couple things, Susan. We want this to be a place where you can come and tool up, but also get restored by the people across the country who are here. I know when I leave these things, I feel like, all right, let's keep going. Eyes on the prize. We're not going to give up. But you're asking a great question. And actually, there's a program that the Worker Circle and a bunch of other groups are supporting, which is an intensive 4-5 week training, right, Jay? The Rise for Freedom that's coming up. And it's starting next Thursday nights and it's subsequent nights at 8 o'clock. And that's one opportunity for that. And Josie just dropped that into there. But there's opportunities through the Center for Common Ground as well. Andrea, maybe you can say a little bit about some of the programs that you regularly host that provide that kind of accelerated training for folks.
Well, we are getting ready to start a whole new training schedule because of the times we're in. So we have a course in volunteer recruitment, a way to build your democracy hubs, your democracy circles. You are in the how to be an effective advocate. So that is a training that we do. Um, Media has been a problem, and there are those folks that are doing actions that are designed to be high profile. We have a Getting Earned Media course, and we're really looking at in that Getting Earned Media course, and maybe some of the others, about talking about how to safely protest in this digital surveillance age. And I'm going to say one thing right now. If you are going to a protest, and I'm specifically thinking the Tesla ones, leave your phone at home. Your cell phone is a tracking device. Whether it is off or on, it is tracking. And your cell phone leaves a footprint of where you were for 90 days.
That's a lot of us, don't realize that. We just think, oh, well, it's off, so it's not doing anything. But do be aware of that, because that's an important thing, and it's going to continue to be something. I've started having my really valuable conversations either by the telephone or face to face with people these days. Forget all that stuff. And it's good to get back to some of the old tech, so to speak, from the 20th century. I'm noticing Josie and some others are dropping important information. The postcards for the VA primary election are now live. So if you're ready to start postcarding, you can put your orders in now. So we hope that you'll take a look at that. I also want to say we've got a couple of actions coming up. April the 5th is a big national day of action that I just want to put on your radar. There's a lot of groups sponsoring mobilizations across the country. Worker Circle is among this huge, large group. And it's a kind of everything in the kitchen sink, because what we have to do is be able to stand together and talk about the many ways that our democracy and its people are under assault right now, and to fight back together. And so we're going to be sending out some information about how to find a protest near you on April the 5th, or how to host a protest. I'm realizing I didn't give a shout out to our Democracy Circle leaders who hosted protests this last month when President Trump addressed Congress. We were part, along with the Center for Common Ground, of the Light for Our Democracy protests that took place. And we had some beautiful protests across the country. And maybe some of you who organized protests were on the phone or on the call tonight. And thank you for doing that. I see Angela's recommending that Sharing Indivisible recommends using Signal for text calls or video calls. That is good, but you still need to know that you're registered with Signal. And Andrea, I know you were sharing a little bit about a different kind of encryption possibility.
Right, and I was just putting a note in the chat. Anything where you have to create an account and that account is sitting on a server, all they have to do, and again, remember, these are highly technical individuals. All they need to do realistically is hack the server, and then they know everybody that's on the server trying to be safe. One of our board members is a retired Silicon Valley engineer. And so he says, well, number one, if what you're doing is that private, then you may want to look at individual encryption. Create your message, encrypt it, call the person and give them the code, and then they have the decryptor on the other end. The other thing that we talk to people about, and it literally just went like that and fell out of my brain. Is if you feel the need to have a phone, get a burner phone. Burner phone are those phones that they sell at the dollar store. It's got like 60 minutes on it, and then donate the phone. And when you run out of minutes, go get another one. So, yes.
I know we're looking at different, going back to Susan's question about tooling up, we're looking at different forms of response that we're going to be talking about in our Effective Advocate. It's not all going to be about legislative action. We're talking about doing one around hosting your own protests and how to do that. We're going to have one that examines a little bit more closely some of these digital security issues for you. So we really want you to know, come on back next month, next April, and not next April, this coming April,
It's coming
next
April.
month, this coming April, because we would love to see you again for Effective Advocate on April 17th. For those of you who are like, oh, should I sign the form to start a democracy circle or not? Don't even worry about it. If you're interested, just sign the form. Then one of our wonderful people will reach out to you. We can have a conversation about it. Don't feel like it's, oh my gosh, I signed it all away. Sign the form. We'll be in touch. We'll talk about it. That's what's so great about being in community with one another. I'm so grateful to have been here tonight with all of you, with Janice, with Andrea, with Jay, with Rachel, with everyone who has taken time out of your busy lives to support one another, to learn what you need to learn, to take action together. Please keep coming back. Bring a friend next time. We'd love to see you.
All right. Take care. Take care. Oh, okay. Mary, here's my email address.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Oh, there's my email address, everybody. I mean, I get 1,000 emails a day. What's 1,005?
Good night.
Take care, everybody.